So a few people asked about doing a home virtualization project, something small scale and not too big like the Dell R710 server we did. And this is actually something I came up with, because it was on sale. I won't lie. And I have to reference the paperwork, make sure I get the numbers right. We went over to Micro Center and they had a FX8320 Black Edition AMD processor, which is a nice 8-core processor and actually does virtualization really well. And grabbed an Asus motherboard. It happens to be a M5A78L-M. They're pretty basic stuff here, very consumer grade, and it's really interesting because not only was it inexpensive, it was on sale. We actually got this processor with the, I do a mail-in rebate, as Micro Center, but the processor was $80 and had a $40 mail-in rebate. And I think they had a deal where you bought it as a combo at Micro Center and you got the board for like another $20. So really inexpensive, very affordable. You can find some of these deals online as well. And then we actually had this case. Steve had bought it and never used it. Well, he did. He nicked it at the top, so it is used technically. But this is a Thermaltake, the Lanbox Lite case. And this is actually going in my house. So my server at home is a little dated and my pfSense at home is really old. And my server that runs Plex is barely able to keep up. It won't do anything more than 1080 and 1080's pushing it to the limit. So I decided to build a virtualization. Went with Xen again for a couple reasons we'll explain here in the software demo of how this all works. But I wanted to virtualize all the things I do. So the servers at home, and it's more than one now, and this is going to bring it down to one server. What it's doing is I have stuff that runs backups, I have stuff that runs my Plex, and then I have a separate box for pfSense. This is all encompassing. So we're actually going to boot Xen. We put a couple network interfaces in here, so it's going to connect to my cable modem at home, and the idea is going to have a virtualized version of pfSense inside of here. So the server will boot up, and we're going to set it to auto boot, auto start. So in case power loss and nobody's home, the kids will still have internet, and the wife, because that's important. But I wanted something really compact and that should work really well. So this is going to be kind of a little project, and I'm load it all up, and then I'll do the video. Well, it's already built now, so I'm going to do the video now on how all the software works. That's the real nuts and bolts of all the virtualization, is showing you how the software works and how we got pfSense virtualized and how you set that up. There's some things you have to do, and that's what we're going to cover, is show you how to get all this working. So, well, here's the box. We got that part covered now. Well, if you couldn't tell by the orange tiles, that video was done about a month ago before we swapped the orange tiles down, and that was on purpose. Well, the tiles were on purpose and the delay. I shot the video because I wanted to put the machine in, I wanted to use it for a while, I wanted to load it all up and really test it and see if I had any hiccups, problems, or anything. And it worked well, but I'm going to cover a couple little things related to it and making sure. So if you decide to set this up in the same way I did at home, where you virtualize pfSense, Xen Orchestra, Plex, and your backup server and any other miscellaneous servers you do in your home on a lesser powered machine, I'll go over how I did all that and set it up. So I'm going to start with what's right here. The internet comes in. There's only 2 network cards in this virtual machine, the LAN box that I showed you in the beginning here. My internet provider, currently Wide Open West, they bring in the internet and it goes to the WAN port on there. Now, I labeled it WAN. I chose one of the network interfaces as WAN. I chose the other one as LAN when I set up XenServer. So when I loaded it, the first interface it found I set to be the management port to manage Xen, and this to be like basically a second network card inside the machine. And the only thing attached to that network card is the WAN side of pfSense. That's it. So in worries of if someone was on the internet, could they get to the management side? No, it's physically not connected. It's connected to one network interface card, and that network interface card is then mapped to the pfSense machine. From there, pfSense hands out DHCP addresses to the LAN network. Now, the LAN network is dual. You have the internal sides and the external side. It's physical one, but it goes in and out the same way. So you attach things to that same network interface, the Plex server I have, the backup server, and Xen Orchestra, all on this LAN part. And then externally, just a standard dumb switch, no smart switch, no managed switch, goes out of there, goes to my UniFi APLR, and there's my Chromecast, laptops, phones. There's a couple Chromecasts out there. These are the wireless devices, and of course the kids got phones, and I didn't bother duplicating, but there's tablets as well, or any internet device. We don't have any IoT devices in the house, so it really is just laptops and tablets and Chromecasts and things connected to it for the wireless, and when friends come over. Now, the things that are hardwired are the gaming system. Always hardwire your gaming system, best way to do it. So if you're having any lag issues, it's not because of interference. So the gaming system we have, which is also the only Windows machine I own, Linux gaming, whole other topic. It runs a lot of games, doesn't run all the games. So the gaming system is hardwired in, and I have the Chromecast Ultra, which supports network jack, and that's because of 4K content. It works really good, and you may have noticed I have an APLR that does not support AC. I'm just not worried about that extra speed going out, but it does cause some hiccups occasionally. If you were trying to stream 4K content to a Chromecast, they recommend a faster connection. I like a hardline connection because it is a much more immediate connection. I've tried both, and these Chromecasts, none of these are connected to 4K TVs. Matter of fact, one of them is an older TV my son has that's 720, so it's just not. It doesn't matter, works great. So there's two Chromecasts there, one Chromecast to our big TV in our living room, and that's the Chromecast Ultra. And then the server's running inside here. The backup server just runs SyncThing and syncs all the data from my network at my office over to my house for a backup. Now, being that it's business data and things like that, one, we encrypt before it leaves. Second, when we land it on here, it's also encrypted on a hard drive. So if you were to physically steal my XenServer, when these boot up, they're using Lux encryption, and you have to manually type in the password. Now, this is done inside of the virtual machine. It has nothing to do with Xen at all. It's the way I set up my Debian machines. Now, that being said, we'll show the usage on it. It's very minimal amount of RAM and processor power at all it takes, and this actually allows for hourly syncing of our critical data to this via SyncThing, via VPN, so everything's locked down and secure. And that's really all this box does. But of course, something could happen, someone could take something, which is why I use encryption. Now, we encrypt it before it leaves. The way we do the encryption for our database backups, we encrypt it before it ever gets off of the servers that run the database, which they're locked down. They need their Lux encryption as well, just like the FreeNAS has its own encryption. I believe it's GLI encryption. We use that as well. So everything top to bottom, security is really, really at the forefront of all this. So even if you were able to get the password to this, you would only find more encrypted data. I just wanted to cover that. A lot of people ask me about that, and I've talked about it, and maybe it needs its own video just talking about top to bottom, encrypting each step of the way. So that being said, it doesn't use a whole lot of horsepower. It runs SyncThing. Did a whole video on SyncThing. Still using it. I think that was like a year or two ago I did the video. It still hums along really well. And what it does is you take two folders, you point them at each other. Picture a self-hosted version of Dropbox if you're not familiar with SyncThing, but I'll leave a link in the video, a link in the description so you can go watch the SyncThing video if you want to understand it. But that's how all the data gets over to here. And it's really lightweight because this only has 512 RAM assigned to it, and I think it's using not even a quarter of that. I think it uses 100 megs of memory. Less meg, not gig. 100 megs, half a gig of RAM assigned to it. Now, the Plex server is a little bit different story. I found with some of the larger content, once you get over, and this is once again running Debian, Plex seems to want about gig of RAM for 1080p, 60 frame a second content. It has a little bit of a struggle with that processor with some, and it comes down to how it's encoded, 4K content. So I have 2 gigs assigned to it, and it does work. Depending how it's encoded, it'll play 4K, but it has no problem playing any 1080 content. That actually works great. No, that barely even sweats the processor, but it is a substantial 4 times more data when you're trying to run 4K. I don't really do much 4K content. Matter of fact, I don't really do much with Plex. It doesn't have a lot of storage because there's just a few things on there. And of course, Xen Orchestra. I like Xen Orchestra because it gives me a nice web interface to manage all of this. Now, important side note here. when you virtualize pfSense. And pfSense is your DHCP server because my internet provider is in a bridge mode. It provides nothing. It bridges it over and gives me one public IP address, which you obviously don't want to assign to the LAN. So one of the things I'm going to cover is how we have the startups working. Because if the XenServer reboots, the XenServer has a static IP, so that's out of the way. But if you have other devices on your network that are not don't have static IPs, they have no idea how to work at all. And I actually let pfSense hand out all the DHCP addresses. So I have it set up to boot up pfSense in the case of power failure unattended. This is not a checkbox in XenServer. It's adding an RC local from the command line to it with a script that I will also leave in the description below. So it's an open source script. I believe I got it off GitHub. I'll leave the GitHub link if I get it off GitHub. If not, I'll show you the script. It's really simple. But you have a startup script that kicks off to automatically start the boxes upon power failure of Xen. Xen will do this in a clustered mode, but the default action is not doing it, so that's how this is set up. So on reboot, it will automatically bring up pfSense again. And you have to set a delay in there, and I'm going to show you what that is when we get to that part. So that's the pretty basics of it. Now we're actually going to show you what the system looks like. And the one thing you have to do to pfSense, that one thing you should know, don't click away, folks, of how to set it up. It's the way you set up the networking in it. So let's jump over to pfSense now. All right, so the one trick that I really had to do here, the problem I ran into and had to fix, was the network performance was terrible. And this was, I think I mentioned this in my virtualization lab tutorial, but I'm going to reiterate it again. And this may be different for different things, or if I loaded the drivers for Xen, it would fix this. Now, what happens is pfSense wants to talk directly to the hardware. That's fine. This is virtual hardware. So being virtual hardware, we had to check a couple boxes here, and you can see, just make it look like this. The hardware checksum offloading, hardware TCP segment offloading, and hardware large receive offloading is all set there. Now, the other instance where you run into this problem is going to be if you have an incompatible, or not fully compatible, I should say, network card with pfSense. You will have to check these boxes because it says that, like, for example, with some Realtek cards is noted in here either. And what it does is a hardware offloading some of the processing. The problem is, because it's a emulated network adapter, this is the only trouble I've had at all running this in here. Now, that being said, this pfSense is not super memory intensive. I only have 1.5 gigs of memory because there's only 8 gigs total in this whole virtual server. So I got 1.5 gigs assigned to pfSense. And this is running, and I'm going to be doing a video on this soon. This is part of the reason I'm doing it at the house too. This is running Snort. It's running... what else we have in here? We got the Snort. We have the traffic shaping with the PF blocker NGs in here. I've been doing a lot of testing, and I've been testing it at home so I can get you guys some more data of like home use and things like that, because there's so much more going on in our network to play with it, and I'm less worried about accidentally screwing something up at home because it won't shut my business down. So I've got some more videos that are up and coming on this, but all these things run perfectly fine with only a couple of processors assigned to them. And now I'm going to jump over to the system itself on Xen. I'm going to use Screen Connect to remote into my computer at home to show the Xen running directly on there. And if you're wondering what you're seeing here, this is the remote support tool we use called Screen Connect. And what Screen Connect does is allows us to remote into machines. And it's convenient, so I'm using it for my machine now too. Now, the notification you see here is because I did not update this to the 7.3 version of Xen, and I'll talk about that, well, real briefly here. You've probably seen a video I did complaining about some of the things and features I took away from it. It's also tricky because I can't load it on here because it needs internet access to load, and it wants all the virtual machines shut down. So I'm actually, if I do decide to load it, I have to copy it onto like a thumb drive and install it because it has to have no virtual machines running before it'll start the download. So that is at least one hiccup I've run into, because once you shut down pfSense, I have no internet access. So let's take a look here at the networking. We'll start there. I do have this on here, but I'm actually not using it right now. Tom's Land of Xen, where you can create internal ones. I got a whole tour of that on my virtualization of how you can create internal only networks, but I'm actually not using any of that for the virtual machines. Here is NIC 0 and NIC 1, and I added the description to cable modem. So the only virtual machine connected to NIC 1 is pfSense. It has 2 network interfaces assigned to it. So if we look over here at the pfSense machine, we go to networking, we see 2 interfaces, LAN, WAN. Now, WAN, like I said, it's the one that connects to the cable modem. So the other virtual machines, let's go to my backup server, only have one. It's attached to LAN. Here's my Plex server, go to networking, and it's attached to LAN. So each one of these is only attached to where they're supposed to be attached. Now, let's get into details. I think I can zoom in a little bit here because I want to talk about the performance. We're going to jump over to here. And this machine's been in for about a month. Let me zoom out maybe just a little bit. So now we're looking at some of the performance. This machine's been on, and I got it zoomed here a month, so you can see January back to December. It was right around just about 30 days ago that I loaded this. So here's where the peak is for the writes back and forth to the hard drives, where I set up all the virtual machines and loaded them. After that, not much at all, because it just doesn't take a lot of power to run these. And that was kind of a nice thing, because I had these as separate machines, and obviously my closet was warm all the time where I kept them, and the power bill would suffer from it. So being able to consolidate everything down to one machine makes it really easy. Now, the machine I didn't mention, but I just had the video on, I set up the Pi hole at home. So let me scoot this over a little bit. And that's the one extra server you see here is the Pi-hole server. And it's another example why having this virtual server at home, I just can spin something up. My kids are guinea pigs for testing how good the Pi-hole was working in a real world usage. We used it for a couple weeks, and that's how I generated the data for that video. But once again, when you look at the performance specifically on that, it takes nothing. Matter of fact, it only had 512 assigned to it. Now let's look at some of the individual servers. Here's the backup server, like we saw, and it's actively backing up right now. And let's zoom into the 1 hour, because we do hourly backups. Here's those little bumps from the hourly backup. It almost uses, can't even tell, but it doesn't look like maybe a couple percent of the CPU power. You look, yeah, 6.3% is what we're hitting to back up that. And there's about, I don't know, quite a few gigs worth of files. I don't have the exact number, but it syncs them, it pulls it through. Our databases aren't that big, so it's not too much to consolidate. It's just important stuff. Performance of here, running all the things that I'm running. The only thing that might slow it down if you're downloading, when I download a Linux distro at home and I'm using a torrent, I'll watch some spikes on here. You'll see little peaks here and there, and that's where I did that, where you see the network performance. Once again, though, with 4 CPUs assigned to pfSense, nothing is fully saturating it or using full performance. Now, the only exception to that's going to be, when you look here, is the you see a lot more usage on this system here, and I was playing around with it, trying to play some 4K content. It peaks it out right away, but 1080 plays perfectly fine. And the Tom's house server mostly is used for Plex. There's a few miscellaneous things I have on there, but it's mostly used for Plex and works wonderful for it. So 1080 content, doesn't stress it, plays great, no issues at all on there. Now, the important part, though, something we want to talk about here is go in here. We're going to go over to the console. I'll open it up in PuTTY. All right, here's that really simple script. And like I said, I'll make sure there's a link to this below, or a link to where it was, or you can get you a copy of the script. Really simple. You put the names in here. So it says names equal, and the two I care about is pfSense and XOA. And VM's display log file matches UID. You give the UIDs of the machine names, which is easy enough to get. Let me switch over to that screen. If you look at any virtual machine, there's the UUID for each one. So you take the UUID of the virtual machine, and you can actually just copy it. And there it is. And then you tell it to auto-start the VMs. And that's all the script really does. It's pretty straightforward, nothing real exciting about it. And it has a VM startup log. It throws this information in here, auto starts VMs. But where do you put it? So the way I set it up was, and we'll just set the go it's in, oops. So you go over here to etc/rc.d, and if I do an ls here, I created this file December 9th, that's when I set this up, rc.local. And all that file does, we're going to go ahead and cat this, is it's a generic RC local file. I had to add Sleep 360 because it would init RC local a little bit too early sometimes before the storage is ready. So 360 seconds is plenty of time for the machine to settle down, be completely happy after a reboot in case anything went wrong, doing a disk check and things like that. Then it just goes and runs start vms.sh. That's it. So this file in RC local, boom, you can do this. Now, I found this in the Xen forums. This is not like unheard of knowledge, so to speak. I didn't invent this at all. And it's really simple. And it even tells you what to do here. It says, make sure you run chmod plus x, because first thing Tom didn't do was read this and then forgot to set it executable. Just an oversight on my part, but it works perfectly fine. I have pulled the plug on the machine a couple times to make sure it would completely come up, and that's great. Other side of it, though, when you're running updates and you want to run the update, reboot, and run another update, you forget, and then the machine starts in the middle of you trying to run an update and you get other errors. So think about this. If you're running updates, make sure it's in maintenance mode so the machines won't start when you do that. But other than that, it's not been a problem at all for doing the things that I do at home and having a home server. It's been really handy. Virtualizing pfSense has been fun because I can do custom things, and before I make any crazy changes when I'm turning things on, I just make a snapshot real quick and go, okay, I'm going to change this or change that, and you make a snapshot of it, make those weird changes, or set up tests that lead to more videos, and it gives me a better than setting up a more sterile lab environment here. I get a whole environment of what in the world are my kids going to load on their laptop, and what is it all going to do, and everything else. So it's kind of fun being able to do this at the home level. So all my home servers and are easy to access. The other reason I use XenServer, and I got to update this one to the same version I have here, but it should work perfectly fine for importing VMs, is in the event something absolutely horrible were to happen to my building, to my business, or anything like that, I want to make sure I have a XenServer at the ready. So I have a spare XenServer here. So we have two of them. One's not even plugged in. It's just I turn it on, I load the updates, and I keep it turned off. It has its own local storage. Because I constantly back up every weekend, with all my backups, I have always recent copies of everything. So if I need to restore a server, I can restore a server. So if something happens to the building, something tragic, a flood, a fire, whatever, the unexpected, I keep extra copies of my servers. I take them each weekend home on an encrypted drive. So I can really quickly restore, and if I had to run my business from my house with my XenServer, I could restore, some of the critical things we may need and make things happen. Like even we self-host even our remote support tools. So we would just change the DNS entries to point to my house when we would grab our laptops around the table and plan. This is just part of the disaster recovery planning, is having a plan B for this. Of course, because I'm exporting them in the standard format, which is something I like about Xen, I could upload them to a cloud-hosted provider as well and not have them in-house. So there's other plans, other options. But that's it for running a virtual server and at my house and how I got it set up. If you like the content here, like and subscribe. If you have questions about this project, let me know. Leave them in the comments below or join our forums where I can hopefully be more interactive and answer questions about it. All right, thanks.